Settle down, settle for less.
Hello and welcome to all. Thank you for the over 300 people who registered today and for joining today's program, Conflict and Common Ground, a conversation on Black History Month. My name is Ari Ackerman. I'm the immediate past co-chair of cabinet at JFNA and currently the chair for the Manhattan division at UJA in New York. Let me first say that our prayers go out to the brave citizens of Ukraine. Our thoughts are with you. For nearly a century, Jewish federations have been working to sustain flourishing Jewish communities around the globe. The actions we take each and every day as a system is guided by our Jewish values and the Masorah traditions, both ancient and modern, that guide us. Black and Jewish people in the United States have a long history of kinship with one another, based on shared minority status and experiences of discrimination and bigotry. Our histories are also interconnected. There are Jews of all races and heritages across the globe, and nearly 10% of American Jews are people of color. Though there are far-reaching social divides today in North America, our two minority communities play a significant role in America realizing her commitment and promise of true inclusion. On a personal note, I speak often about the most important pieces of my life being family and Jewish continuity. I feel so blessed to have such strong familial role models that I look up to and wholeheartedly love. I have some on the call today with my father and sister and niece and nephew. But as many of you have heard me say before, my incredibly and beloved mother, who I lost 9 years ago, and grandfather, who I lost 3 years ago, are the driving forces within me to have a fanatic-like passion to do all I can for the survival, continuity, and sustainability of the Jewish people in Israel. They taught me the beauty of tikkun olam and how to give back, taught me to love Israel. Always give more than you can, both with your time and support, and stress the importance of our beautiful heritage and traditions and responsibility that come with being Jewish. And as the incredibly proud father of a 2-year and 3-month-old, this dedication to my Jewish heritage now is a face, a beautiful face, that has captured my whole heart, who I want to make sure understands and feels this same passion and responsibility in her heart of being a proud Jew and sticking up for what is right and just in this world. Even before the uptick of violent events of the past few years, it was clear that the need for action is urgent. Hate, racism, anti-Semitism, and all forms of discrimination are never acceptable. Martin Luther King taught us all the importance of the now in standing up for our fellow human being, that we all have a place at the table, both in society at large and within the Jewish community. The importance I feel for true inclusion, I've always said, is more than in my heart, but in my blood as well. As I mentioned, I'm the incredibly proud grandson of a Jewish leader who was also at the forefront of the civil rights movement in the United States and had a very personal connection to Martin Luther King. If it's okay, I'm going to read a passage from my grandfather's book biography that talks about his first interaction with the man who would soon after become a close friend. This is the book, and I'm going to read you a short passage. One of my anchors at the time was Harry Wachtel. He wasn't only a brilliant attorney, an exceptional director, and a friend. He was endowed with wisdom, sensitivity, and an endless capacity for listening. During moments of pressure and uncertainty, I found myself going down to his office, also located at 711, just to sit with him, to carry on a short conversation about the company, and to listen to his take on things. During some of these meetings, I saw a dark-skinned man in Harry's office who was several years younger than me. Only after my third meeting did I realize that this was Martin Luther King Jr., whose name blazed the newspaper headlines. Harry had been representing him for several months, helping him in the struggle for Black rights. I shook his hand and said, "My pleasure to meet you. I'm Meshulam Riklis." That's my grandfather. "I'm Jewish. I'm an immigrant. I know exactly what it is you're fighting for." He shook my hand and said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much." 2 days after that handshake on June 11th, 1963, President Kennedy gave an unforgettable speech as he addressed Congress in Washington, D.C. He fought against members of the House of Representatives, against prejudice and racism, in order to pass the Civil Rights Act, and spoke of the right of every human being to receive service everywhere, in buses, hotels, movie theaters, shops, restaurants, and workplaces. I felt as if he were pointing an accusing finger directly at me. In some of our retail chains, there were some sales centers in which dining halls and fast food stands operated with a separation between blacks and whites. But even worse, we had such a dining lounge in my main office building. Here too, racial discrimination ruled. I was deeply ashamed. I asked myself, how come I hadn't been sensitive enough to realize this? A day after Kennedy's speech, I once again showed up at Harry's office to find Martin Luther King Jr. sitting opposite him. I entered the room and spoke to him directly. "Mr. King, I've decided to cancel the segregation in all the food stations in all our stores. In my chain, this shame will end as of tomorrow. And the first lounge where that will happen is right here in our central building. Harry got up from his chair and hugged me. Martin looked at us. When Harry sat down once again, Martin put out his hand to me. I came up to him and embraced him strongly. I then asked, "What else can I do to help?" He smiled. "What you've just said here this morning, Mr. Rickless, is worth everything." I liked his style. He wasn't a fire and brimstone revolutionary. His manner of speech was gentle. When he thanked me, I felt his sincere gratitude. Several days later, he came to eat in the lounge of our building at 7-Eleven. 2 months later, Martin Luther King Jr. led the Great March in Washington. The march became the embodiment of the fight against racial segregation and ended with his unforgettable speech, "I Have a Dream," and Joan Baez's Nightingale rendition of "We Shall Overcome." The history of the United States was changing in front of our eyes, and we didn't sit on the sidelines. I had first read this passage at a Havdalah reflection during a cabinet civil rights mission to Alabama, exactly 1 week after my grandfather had unexpectedly passed away. As this was a man who treated me like a son and I loved like a father, I thought it might be too painful for me to still go on that mission. But in my heart, I felt there was no better way to honor my grandfather's legacy. As the 3-year anniversary of his passing just took place, I remain so immensely proud of my grandfather for so many reasons, but none more than the brave and powerful role he could play in this country's history of inclusion for all. I thank you all for allowing me to share my family story. We have an incredible program in store for you all today, which will be led off by a true protector of justice and American democracy and a champion of Black-Jewish relations in North America, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of the 23rd District in Florida. I will see you all at the conclusion of this, and I now turn it over to you, Congresswoman Schultz.
Thank you so much, Ari, for your kind words, and good afternoon, everyone. And Ari, thank you for sharing that poignant story about your family's history and their commitment to justice. It is wonderful to be here with the Jewish Federation family as we celebrate this last day of Black History Month. As February comes to a close, let us be reminded that Black history is American history. And we must see this history, the lives, struggles, contributions, achievements, tragedies, and triumphs as part of the American story. And I would add, given the current war in Ukraine, and I agree wholeheartedly with grandparents on both sides of my family that emigrated to the United States from Ukraine, that just as much emphasis should be placed on Black Americans' influence and experiences with US foreign policy and international relations. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield is a shining example of the long, rich history of Black diplomats. We thank her for her service and resilience as we keep the Ukrainian Jewish community and all the people of Ukraine close in our hearts and our thoughts during this very difficult time of war and conflict. I'm proud that JFNA and Open Door Media are using their platforms to reflect on what this month means for the greater Jewish community and to explore the ties that bind the Black and Jewish communities. Almost 3 years ago, Congresswoman Lawrence, Congressman Zeldin, former Congressman Hurd, and the late Congressman John Lewis and I founded the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. We all shared a commitment and pride in the history of our communities, fighting hatred, injustice, and inequality together. Our histories are intertwined and our communities are bound by so many common experiences and shared values that it's natural for the Black and Jewish communities to work as partners in pursuit of justice and equality, as we have for generations. Today, this work is more important than ever. More than a dozen historically Black colleges and universities reported bomb threats recently, prompting calls for federal law enforcement to investigate amid campus lockdowns. These threats, most coming on the first day of Black History Month, deepened a sense of unease that Black Americans already face daily. And mere days after we recognized International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Union Station in DC was defaced with swastikas. Nazis rallied in my home state of Florida, and synagogues and Jewish businesses were vandalized in Chicago. There have already been over 100 anti-Semitic incidents recorded this year, and we know that many other racially charged crimes are underreported and under-identified each and every day. Sadly, in my home state, there is a bill that would ban discussions that make school employees or students, quote, feel discomfort or guilt on account of race, sex, or national origin. This legislation is rooted in ignorance, fear, and bigotry. If we do not teach about the past, how can we be certain that history will not repeat itself? Both Jews and African Americans have a moral obligation to teach about every chapter of our history, no matter how painful or uncomfortable. Only then can we build a more equitable country and prevent hatred and racial injustice in all its hideous forms. I'm proud that in my home county, this important work is being done as we speak. As many of you know, last April, my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Congressman Alcee Hastings, passed away. He also represented parts of Broward County, lived there for decades, and was a champion of the importance of Black-Jewish relations. We worked tirelessly on this topic for many years at home and in Washington. Alcee impacted so many lives, none more than my friend Evan Goldman of the Jewish Federation of Broward County, who, along with Alcee's son and my friend and college classmate Jody Hastings and Denise Latow, a Black Jewish business person, created what will forever be known as the Alcee L. Hastings Broward Black Jewish Alliance. The alliance reflects the unique character of Broward County, one of the most diverse communities in America. Its purpose is to promote solidarity between the Jewish and African American communities in Broward County and educate the public to combat hatred, cultivate relationships, and develop future leaders in the struggle against racism and anti-Semitism. As a direct result of this initiative, scores of non-traditional partners now work in collaboration, underscoring that we are indeed stronger together. I am proud of the Alliance and of the vital work that they are doing. Across this country, African Americans and Jews are confronting, overcoming, and still attempting to overcome discriminatory obstacles that have at times been deliberately put in our way. But we will not be silent when we see and face injustice. Our communities must come together, continue to unite, and to confront hatred, intolerance, and injustice wherever and whenever they rear their ugly heads. So in this time of strife and discord, let us rededicate ourselves to act in the pursuit of justice and for what we as Jews are compelled to pursue, Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Thank you again for inviting me to join you this afternoon, and have a wonderful day. And I look forward to moving forward together in unity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Hi, everyone. My name is Micah Smith, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Film and Television at Open Door Media and the producer of the three-part, soon-to-be four-part series about the history of the relationship between Black and Jewish Americans. I want to thank our organizational leadership and sponsors for supporting this important initiative. Thank you to the team at Jewish Federations of North America for co-producing this series with us. Thank you as well to the Walder Foundation and the Bernstein Foundation for their support. Creating media to generate a conversation about this complex and contentious history was not an undertaking any of us took lightly. I personally have been working on this series for over 3 years, reading countless books, speaking to academics, historians, museum curators, ministers and rabbis, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Together with JFNA, we assembled a diverse team to work on the project, doing our best to include many perspectives, opinions, and different ways to look at the narratives of Black and Jewish relations. I will admit that working on something as politically complex as this was scary, for lack of a better word, but we knew it was important. Peace and brotherhood do not come as a result of ignorance. We have an obligation to look the past right in the eye, the good and the bad. We must learn from our triumphs and our mistakes so that together we can build a better world. Now, I'd like to share a few clips that highlight the series. We'll start off with a clip from our first episode that explores the history from roughly 1880 until World War II. And I will admit that my internet connection sometimes has some trouble, so I do apologize in advance if there's any issues. Give me one moment while I share my screen.
While the Jewish people are a diverse, multiracial group, for most of American history, when we speak about the interactions between Blacks and Jews, we're speaking about Jews of European descent. Among those Jews were some of my family. In the late 19th century, my mom's side of the family were Ashkenazi Jews living under harsh discrimination in Russia. There was violent, state-sanctioned anti-Semitism, and Jews were forced to live in what was essentially a giant ghetto known as the Pale of Settlement. Like many Jews, my great-great-grandparents escaped persecution and came to America seeking religious and economic freedom. And yet, my mother's family immigrated during the height of American anti-Semitism. Jewish Americans were subjected to physical attacks, discrimination, and vilification in the media. My father's side of the family came to America under very different circumstances. They were kidnapped from Africa, brought to America in shackles, and sold into bondage. My dad's great-great-grandparents were the children of former slaves living in Georgia. Haunted by the horrors of slavery, they were still fighting for their lives and future in the racist South. They too faced physical violence, vilification in the media, and discrimination at almost every level, including from the police, the judicial system, banks, and schools.
Okay, so the second clip, it comes from our second episode and is about the civil rights movement and the role that the Jews played in the movement. So one moment.
Blacks and Jews had increasingly come together to fight discrimination. So by the 1950s, no one was surprised that Jewish activists made up a huge percentage of the non-Black people involved in the struggle. American Jews played a key role in the founding and funding of some of the most important civil rights organizations. In 1964, a campaign known as the Mississippi Freedom Summer brought volunteers from across the country to help register Black voters in Mississippi. Black and white college students from the North, with a disproportionate number being Jews, were bussed down for the effort. Early that summer, 2 Jewish activists, Michael Schwermer and Andrew Goodman, and 1 local activist, James Chaney, were arrested by a sheriff who was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Shortly thereafter, all 3 were driven out to a deserted area and murdered by a group of Klansmen. While the murder of Black men in the South rarely made national headlines, news of the murder of 2 white activists further publicized the unchecked institutional violence of Southern segregationists. Just after Chaney, Goodman, and Schwermer disappeared, 17 rabbis were arrested alongside Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others. Their crime? Sitting and praying at a whites-only restaurant. This was no isolated incident. King shared a long, fruitful relationship with many Jewish leaders. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel walked arm in arm with Dr. King in his 1965 March on Selma, and Rabbi Joachim Prince warmed up the crowd for his good friend Dr. King to deliver his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. AJC treasurer Stanley Levison was a close friend of Dr. King. He drafted some of his articles and speeches, prepared his tax returns, and raised money for organizations that Dr. King supported.
Okay, and this third clip is from the third episode, and this episode picks up right after the civil rights movement.
In August 2021, the Brooklyn neighborhood of Crown Heights came together for One Crown Heights, a day of music, entertainment, rides, children's activities, and community conversation. The atmosphere was reminiscent of the historic cooperation during the civil rights movement, when so many Jews stood together with Black Americans against racism. The peace and joy on the streets was in stark contrast to the violence and mayhem that occurred on those same streets 30 years prior. In August 1991, the extreme tensions between Jews and Blacks in Crown Heights exploded into 3 days of riots directed towards the Jewish community. How did the relationships between these communities deteriorate so dramatically? And how did the sides rebound and rebuild the meaningful partnerships we're starting to see more of today?
So that's just a taste of this series that we put together, and we look forward to sharing the final episode in the near future. Now, I would like to introduce my colleague, Noam Weissman, Executive Director of Open Door Media and the moderator for today's discussion. Noam?
Micah, thank you so much for showing us those films. Been working on them for a while with Micah as well, and I could tell you that, like Micah said, it's been fun, it's been difficult, it's been really important. And all of those videos can be found on the YouTube channel Unpacked and on the platform Unpacked.education. Tremendous thank yous go to the Jewish Federation of North America for believing in this product together with us, to see the importance of this product and this project, to the Walder Foundation, to the Bernstein Foundation, none of this would be possible without these visionary groups. So tremendous, tremendous gratitude that I have for you, that we as an organization have for you and putting this whole thing together. I also want to just make a note that very soon we're going to do a conversation between me and Kylie Unell, Ashira Solomon, and Isaiah Rothstein. I'll give their bios in a minute. And then right after that, we're going to do Q&A. I also want to say something that I just find really compelling from a personal perspective. My older brother is about to do a similar sort of conversation at the White House in 40 minutes. And both of us are having these conversations about the celebrating and commemorating Black History Month. So it's just a remarkable thing that I'm just thinking about from a personal lens and a personal landscape that we're both doing this today. My thinking as an educator always is very simple. When we put this project together, we knew that there would be people with strong opinions, strong perspectives who viewed these topics differently. But as you saw from the different clips, really important to learn about our history, to think about the past, and to really consider what we could be doing for the future. My North Star as an educator always is to do something very simple, to educate and inspire. That's my North Star, and to ultimately do good. And that's what these videos are about. People coming together to consider the past, to think about the present, and to really ultimately cultivate a better future. That's what this task is all about. So I want to ask 3 different people to join me in this conversation. The first one is Kylie Unell. Kylie Unell is a producer and the narrator of for this series. You saw Kylie in the video in those 3 videos. Kylie is a Dean's Doctoral Fellow at NYU, concentrating in Jewish philosophy with a concentration on the intersection between Moses Mendelssohn and Booker T. Washington's philosophy of self-cultivation. She was named an inspiring Jewish philosopher by the New York Jewish Week for their annual 36 Under 36. She's a writer and a podcaster. She has a very viral article titled "My Mom is White, My Dad is Black, Don't Call Me a Jew of Color." And she also was on Tablet Studios podcast, How to Fix a Soul in 30 Days. In addition to her media work, she is the co-producer of a comedy show called Sweepstakes Comedy and runs Models of Faith, a photo blog telling stories of young people navigating life and faith. And most importantly, she was a guest on my podcast, The Power Of, and she was awesome. Where we spoke about empathy. She is incredible. Isaiah Rothstein is the rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at the Jewish Federations of North America, been our brother in putting this whole project together. And it's been unbelievable working with Isaiah, an incredible mensch of a human being, rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at the JFNA. Like I said, Rabbi Isaiah Joseph Rothstein serves as the rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at JFNA and grew up in a mixed race family in the ultra-Orthodox community of Monsey, New York. Isaiah most recently served as rabbi in residence at Hazon, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability. He's the co-founder of the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, and he is, and Kamocha, a community for Black Orthodox Jews. Isaiah is a member of the Schusterman Foundation's ROI Fellowship and was listed as one of the Jewish Week's 36 Under 36. Okay, seems to be a theme here. While he's not working to keep the world safe for democracy, Isaiah is writing a musical about Queen Esther. And then we have Ashira Solomon. Welcome, Ashira. Ashira and I just met recently, community associate at Jewish Community Relations Council in Detroit. Ashira joined AJC as a community associate in January of 2021. In this position, she works to build and enhance AJC's initiatives in unity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to joining the organization, Solomon was co-chair of the first founding diversity council at Berkeley High School. She served as a peer mediator for the Peers Making Peace program and was a peer leader on high school retreats. Since then, she has worked for and with Jewish nonprofits in support and project management roles in order to be instrumental in the organization's vision and success. Solomon continues to be a point of contact for communities in the areas of social and environmental progress. It is so incredible to have the 3 of you together with me in conversation. So let's dive right into this. And if anybody has questions, please put it in the Q&A box. And after this conversation, I'll be able to field some of these questions and to ask our incredible panelists. So let's start with Ashira. Ashira, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this discussion.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Noam. And thank you for having me here today. I'm so honored to participate in this meaningful discussion, particularly because it really hits home for me, both personally and professionally. I myself am a multiracial Jew, and I really enjoy my intersectionality and all the varying pieces that make me who I am. And at the same time, it's becoming very clear to me that both cultural understanding or lack thereof and the way history is taught and informed here in America are huge barriers in our progression as a society. So I'm here today because I want to be a part of that resolution to change that. And this film series really caught my attention as a way to offer greater understanding to our communities.
Thank you, Ashira. Kylie, quickly about you. How did you, what brought you to this discussion?
What brought me to the discussion was being in the film series.
That makes a lot of sense.
We can end it there if that's too long.
Yes, let's end it there, and I'll get to a follow-up.
Thanks, Rob.
And Isaiah, how about you? What brought you to this discussion? I think we know the answer.
Yeah. How did I get here? I mean, I would first say from a young age, I've wanted to serve the Jewish people and all of humanity. And today I serve as rabbinic scholar and public affairs advisor at JFNA, Jewish Federations of North America, where we truly do serve humanity. As a collective, as Ari mentioned at the beginning, 146 Jewish federations, 300 network communities, 125 Jewish community relations councils, and our partners with the Jewish Agency and the JDC. We all work collectively, and just a shout out to my colleagues who joined us for today's conversation. We work collectively every day to serve those who are most vulnerable and ensure that our Jewish communities flourish. And not just that our Jewish communities flourish, but that all of civil society. I think what also brings me here is I grew up in the holy city of Monsey, New York. I'm one of 3 boys, and we are a beautiful mixed race family. We are descendants of people who fought in the American Revolutionary War. We are descendants of people who were enslaved on this soil of America in Sawyerville, Alabama. And we are also descendants of people who fled Russian pogroms in the very place that's at war as we speak. And at JFNA, we had the pleasure of supporting this video project and informing and working closely on how the sauce gets made and how things come together. And just to know, to your point, just how difficult sometimes it is and how brave and courageous it is to approach these topics and recognizing the sensitivity. So I'm glad that I was able to participate in this muddled and muddy and also powerful and beautiful experience of bringing these 4-part video series together.
One of my mentors, teacher, Rabbi Menachem Leibtag, says that he learned his educational philosophy from an Israeli construction site. And an Israeli construction site, it says, Sakana kan bonim, danger, we're building here. And only if you're in a place of where there's conflict, where there's challenges, where there's tension, can you actually build, can you actually grow from there? And those are the places where we have to be learning, we have to be teaching. And that's why this video series and the lesson plans and the educational resources, I think I cannot think of something more critical for the Jewish communities here and the Black communities and the Black Jewish communities together to be learning about all of these topics. So let me ask all three of you this question. You know, people identify as Black and Jewish. How do you think a series that brings the Jewish narrative into Black History Month will be received in the communities that you live in? How do you see this? So let's start with you, Kylie.
Okay. Well, I'm in the Jewish community predominantly, though what drew me to the series was my own personal work of trying to really break down the barriers that I see human beings putting up. And it's what we've put up for the entirety of human existence. It's, how do we use differences to create groups? And I really want to further the breakdown of those groupings and try and bring humanity together as a whole. And part of the way to do that is to show the commonalities between our stories and between our experiences. And so I think as it relates to this video series in particular, what this serves to show is the interrelation between the two communities and the overlap between the communal experiences to help us see that we have a lot more in common than we do, kind of like differentiating us. And I embody that as a human who is both Black and Jewish, who has both sides of that identity. And sometimes it feels like they're like two warring sides inside of me, and they're trying to figure out how they fit together. And my purpose in the world is to show that they can fit together very easily. I think somebody once told me everything in the body is a metaphor, and we have two eyes, which means that we see things in pair. We see things in kind of like an attempt to see things very equally, which is the most human thing to do. They must fit together. But in reality, the world is so much bigger than that. Our two eyes just see things and wants to create balance, but everything fits together in a more beautiful way than we can possibly understand. And I think that this video series pushes that and moves us towards seeing things as fitting as opposed to maybe not.
It's a beautiful description. Ashira, how do you see it? How do you see your community? How do you see the series in being received in the communities you're part of?
So I think that the Jewish community and myself working closely with congregations, with the Jewish community at large, I think that our community struggles with knowing when is the right time to sit down and listen to the narrative and when to be participating in uplifting the narrative. And from my own perspective, trust me, Black Jews and Jewish people of color in our Jewish community want to hear from you as Jewish communal leaders and want to hear that you're taking great interest in diverse narratives. And I think this particular series will be received quite well, particularly because of how it was put together. This series combines facts and sensitivities of both communities and their overlap in a very truthful way. I think that most producers touch on this and, they're very delicate with it. And I greatly appreciated the historical honesty in this series. I think it'll just really move us forward. In addition to that, there are the Unpacked for Educators learning materials that complement the series, which I think is an excellent tool for engaging communities in this history and in the conversation.
Thanks, Ashira. Isaiah, speak to us about your communities. How do you see this being? How do you see it being responded to?
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll also just I'll just say that I really, what Kylie shared a moment ago. I've always admired this about you, Kylie, of how you agitate and push back against the lexicon of language and labels and title and all of it, and also recognizing that if we play within certain rules of engagement around identity politics, or we set up binaries, or how we use language, we sometimes risk perpetuating some of the social issues that exist. And I just want us to continue to remind ourselves of one of the things that's pretty unique about this series is we are purposeful about not setting a binary of Black and Jewish, recognizing that we as a Jewish community are multiracial, are multi-ethnic, are multicultural, right? We're from Global Jewry, Google Global Jewry, Jewish federations come up, we support Jews all over the world. That's some of what our mandate of being a light onto the nations is. And a friend of mine, Jared Jackson, he runs Jews in All Use. He says, when people say Black Jewish or race relations, he's like, what, you want me to have a conversation with myself? Seeing race as an us them issue versus a we kind of discussion. And so on that note, I'll tell you who I've shared the video series with and some reactions I've got. I shared this with my mother's side of the family, who are Black and of other faiths. And I've also shared this with Haredi Jews from Monsey, New York. And just to give some context also of kind of how I think, that's my life. And it is amazing what kind of conversations emerged. How these videos have the power to bridge understanding, I think is really important. We've mentioned that it's messy, but also the power of how through really sitting with content, and again, digestible and accessible in video format versus the many academic works that these videos are even based on. Bridging understanding is my hope. My hope is also that Jewish organizations and organizations of other faiths we'll use these videos and other resources that we can provide and that others provide to build upon civic partnerships, to strengthen integrity, to sit with even 60 seconds with other community members and to ask those questions of how do we use these videos, like Ashira said, to strengthen our relationships with integrity, to advance authenticity with who we are as communities. So that's my hope.
That's beautiful. And it's my hope as well. To remind everyone, because I saw this question come up a few times, you could find this series. 3 of the videos have been out. It's on the YouTube channel Unpacked, and you could find it there. And like Ashira mentioned, on Unpacked for Educators is where you could find the discussion questions, the learning activities, and really anything you could want to run a classroom discussion around these really important topics. Kylie, I have another question for you, because I remember this coming up with our super talented producer director, Micah Smith, when I think we found out you were from Kansas City, if I'm correct about that. He was so excited because of stories there. How did learning about Kansas City, your birthplace, affect how you viewed this project?
The only reason I did this project in large part was because of that. I'm not gonna lie, I was really hesitant about doing it because I wrote this article in 2020, the height of Black Lives Matter and right after George Floyd. And I spent that summer feeling tokenized, feeling like I had been put in boxes, and I just wanted to be related to as a human, and as a Jewish human at that. And it felt like people kept saying, well, you're Black, so you can speak to this thing. And it was really frustrating. And it was also just like all these parts of my identity and pain and pain, I guess, that I hadn't fully processed or didn't know how to even like touch. And so I got asked to do this project or about this project. And I was like, I'm going to say no. And then Micah was like, well, I totally said, before I even knew you were from Kansas, I had this idea. We were going to root it in Kansas City because there's actually this really rich history in Kansas City. And at that point, it felt like God was saying, like, okay, Kylie, I know how you feel, but I also know that this is something you need to do here. This is rooted in you. And so it opened up the door to like really explore myself. And it was really sensitive and really raw. But to be able to see, within myself, I have a Black side and I have a Jewish side. I have oppression on both sides of my family lineage. I have 2 identities that are contentious, I guess you could say, that are the topic of conversation in American dialogue today. And so that's one thing, but then to have Kansas City as a rooting point for that, for another element of my identity. I grew up in a suburb outside of Kansas City called Overland Park. My grandparents, my mom is from Kansas City, Missouri. That's where my life feels like it's rooted. And so to have my identity further rooted in this story of civil rights in a way that I didn't know was something that just, I can't, it's really hard to put into words, but it gave me the sense that I'm really here for a reason, honestly. And that there's a part of me that has like really important work to do. Not a part of me, I'm here to do really important work, and that I'm really rooted in this from all different angles. And that was really cool. It kind of feels like this is different, but Moses was planted in Egypt before he was taken out, before he took the Jews out. And to be planted in the world that you have to kind of like work with is a really special thing. And I didn't know that until this project.
Well, your authenticity and genuineness really comes out throughout the whole project, just brilliantly and poignantly. And I think the very fact that you didn't want to do this instinctively is probably what made you such an awesome host for the series, because you brought yourself to it in such a real way. It was an active decision, and all of us benefit from it. So tremendous gratitude to you for doing such a beautiful job at being the host and being the voice of the series. I want to ask one last question to the 3 of you, and jump in whomever. What do you recommend to educators, people like me, people like whomever, just like who are sometimes could feel unsure about teaching about this topic? We got thousands of educators out there, literally. What do you recommend? How do you teach about this to the broader world? Give us your recommendations. Give us words of encouragement.
my PhD is in the study of Moses Mendelssohn and Booker T. Washington. So I feel like in some way I can just recommend the approach of teaching it from the vantage point of unity. That's something that excites me, the possibility of seeing the overlap and the moments in history when Jews and Blacks not only work together, but when their thought aligned, when their ideas about what it is to be a minority within a majority culture that didn't love them, where that aligns, like that's a very powerful thing. And I think it sets up a really beautiful foundation for then how to talk about the moments when the communities didn't love each other, where there was racism, where there was slave ownership. Like there's a lot of ugly within the history as much as there is beauty. I think the beauty outweighs the ugly, but it's important, I think, to ground in unity and to be able to understand the complexities of the history of the community.
Thanks, Kylie. Isaiah or Shira, you want to add anything?
You know, I think that teaching, using these materials and teaching, and Kylie, thank you for everything you said. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Always in unity. Really teaching this series through understanding relationships. The Black-Jewish relationship is huge. Right? People like Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel and many of the other figures that Kylie mentioned throughout the series, they weren't just allies and advocates, they were friends. And you feel motivated for a friend. I know that it's these kinds of relationships that make it possible for, our JCRC in Detroit to have begun a coalition for Black and Jewish unity. It's real, authentic relationships, and relationship building is always something that is very relevant to our community, our communities. So teaching it from the perspective of valuable relationships is also, I think, very, very valuable.
Thanks, Ashira. Isaiah, last word before I go to Q&A.
Yeah, amen. I mean, one is that Black History Month is 1 month. There are 11 months, other months, when we ought to and we can be engaging in conversations about our own racial identities, about our moral responsibilities to stand for racial justice and against all forms of hate. And I'll just say that each and every day, the work that we do with Jewish Federations of North America's initiatives for Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion, also known as JEDI, and our Moed community, which is Jewish Federation's first program to be found and led by Jewish people of color. Our aim is to have ongoing education, ongoing ways of engaging around issues relating to who we are, communal belonging, and American democracy. And these videos are incredible tools for that. And I think what I would encourage us is one, this idea that it's rooted in me, that I heard from Kylie before. I could not relate to that any more than it's in my bones, the same. Like right away, I was like, amen to that. Like it is rooted in me. And I would encourage all of us to see how it is rooted in all of us, that our stories, our collective responsibility. This isn't just a thing we do. This is our Jewish community. This is a Jewish issue. This is a Jewish need. And I believe that by coming together today, for even just a brief amount of time, it is that reminder that this is a collective responsibility for us to carry for the sake of our generation.
Isaiah, Kylie, and Ashira, if my goal as an educator is to educate and inspire as my North Star to do good, I can think of no better 3 people than the 3 of you to help make this all possible, to educate and to inspire. So that was a joy for me to listen to each of you. I want to now take it to questions. We have a limited time right now, and I'm going to start with a very juicy question from the audience, if I may call it that. But like I said, sakana kan bonim, danger, we're building here. So let's ask these questions. So it was said, I don't know if it's anonymous or not. So it was said that Black history is American history. And if so, why do we still have Black History Month? Question number 2, why do some say Jewish people of color instead of just Jews? Both feel like we are separating people instead of bringing us together. Now, that might have been framed as a statement, but I'm going to frame it as a question. How do you see that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do we do about this? Any of you? And this might be the only question we get. So jump in. Whoever feels most comfortable. Kylie, I see you.
Yeah, I have a problem with all of this. So I don't like Black History Month. I think it's something that tokenizes a very important element of American history and human history that should be integrated into an entire lifetime. It should be it's teaching, it's education, it's stories of human beings that need to be heard all the time. Like, it's not something that needs to be relegated to the month of February, which, by the way, is the shortest month of the year. It's not something that needs to be, and it creates, I don't know, it creates a certain pressure. I need to get all my Black literature in this month. I need to get all my Black TV shows in this month. I need to care about this community extra this month. And for me, I know that when I've put pressure on myself to do anything, I don't do it because it's too scary and you don't know where to start. And there's so many places to go, and they're human. It's human history. And I think that it's something that can have a more balanced approach and a more kind of balanced place, and something that can be seen as important all the time. So that's one thing. As it relates to the
before you get to point number 2, Kylie, what I just want as an educator is to think, Isaiah, Ashira, if you have a conflicting view or you want to add to that, please think about your thoughts on that. And then let's get to point 2 here. Kylie. Go.
Yeah, I think as it relates to Jews, I'm very pro expanding the term from within, not creating different terms. So Jews of color doesn't speak to me. I don't use that term. I don't apply it to myself. I would rather expand the term to encompass people of all backgrounds and colors, so that we start to see Jews as something that can fit, or the Judaism and Jew as a term that can fit everybody, as opposed to needing to be given kind of caveats or added words. I think the word in and of itself and the essence of Judaism is expansive enough to hold all of that. And I'd rather kind of work from the inside to push the boundaries out, as opposed to creating new things. That's my take.
Isaiah or Ashira?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes up for me is the word and I think it's a very important and difficult word to hold, especially when it comes to so many things that are put into like a matrix of separation and boxes and labels. And so, like, on the one hand, if we are only focusing on the experiences of Black and African American people during February, right, then it's additive. So that would be seen as tokenistic, that would be seen as transactional, right? Versus, but we also need, right, and we also need to create mechanisms for visibility, right? And we should also be thinking about, exactly to your point, Kylie, about how this works. Some people get PhDs in literally 30-second segments that we talked about in this video series. Some people get their, and to your point also about the PhD you're getting, so I think like just the and piece, and similarly with the term Jew of color, I'll just note that some people say Jewish person of color to center the Jewish and not the racial element, to just get a person, the word person in there. So it's not just JOC, right? So Jewish person of color, just to remind ourselves to center the personhood and not the race, so, but I'll also add, and it's reductive. It's a term that's a catch-all phrase. There's many people who have different racial and ethnic identities that don't use that language. So, and it's created a conversation that hasn't existed. Unfortunately, in my youth, I could not have even imagined that we would be doing what we're doing right now. So, and through language, we've created visibility. So it's messy. It is messy. It's a good, messy question for us.
Ashira, do you want the last word here, or should I ask one more question?
Absolutely. The perspectives were beautiful, and I'm just going to add that as Rabbi Rothstein mentioned, it's interesting to me because I agree 100%. Of course, Black history is American history and should be taught year round. And I hope that we will get to a point where, like I said, visibility in our education system even is more prominent and more, diverse. And then at the same time, I recall that Carter Woodson created well, at the time it was a week, but it was a Black History Week, really, because there was not representation of African American history in the books. And so it's almost like it's like racial equity, right? It's like not only should we be learning it all year round, 12 months, but we should learn it we should learn it double, in February. We should, or any other month, we should learn even more so than we would be learning, because we're still catching up in our education. It's hard work getting to where we need to be, and it's going to take time to really get there. And then that's mainly what I would add.
Thanks, Ashira. Thank you, and thanks. We have amazing questions coming in. This could really be a few-hour workshop, JFNA. Let's think about that. But there's so many excellent questions coming in. I want to recommend to everyone watch the video series. Some questions came up about what's the content in the video series. Our amazing producer director Micah Smith really did an incredible job taking so many different people's worldviews and shaping a really meaningful narrative around it. And our educational resources, which are guided by Avi Posen so brilliantly with the help of JFNA, with the help of a few others. It's just really important for you to take a look at it. Go to YouTube, check out Unpacked, go to Unpacked.education. It's all there. A tremendous thank you to Isaiah, to Kylie, to Ashira. It's such an incredible opportunity to hear from different thinkers about the same ideas, and to do so in a way that is meaningful, respectful, and really takes us to the next level in terms of gaining a meaningful education around this. I'm going to pass it back to Ari Ackerman, who, like he mentioned before, is the immediate past chair of Jewish Federation's National Young Leadership Cabinet and the current chair of UJA New York's Manhattan Division, to offer closing remarks. Thanks, Ari.
Thank you, Noam. And wow, that was incredible. Everybody spoke so beautifully and passionately, and so it's so real. I mean, I was blown away by this entire conversation. So thank you, and thank you to each of you for joining us for this program, Conflict and Common Ground, in celebration of Black History Month. So listening to this incredible conversation, there's no question that we are an organization and a community that fights for those in need, no matter what, where, and no matter who. We build infrastructure, trust, and hope. We are at the cutting edge of philanthropy, finding new and innovative ways to reach and impact more people. We're able to do these things because we strive to break down barriers, both tangible and intangible, and aim to build a culture of welcome, inclusion, and belonging. These things are at our very core and are fundamental to being Jewish. Our strength is in our collective, the ability to hear every voice, to be accountable to one another, to take every measure to do good, just as Rabbi Isaiah talked about. Our communities are still dealing with currents of hatred and bigotry from baseless extremists who seek to undermine our identity and heritage. There is no distinction between different forms of hatred, whether the source is a bomb threat to historically Black universities or a terror-driven hostage crisis at a synagogue. As our nation suffers from diverse currents that threaten our cohesion as an American people, let the Black and Jewish communities shine a beacon of light in our joint pursuits of unity, solidarity, and mutual responsibility. As is mentioned, we have marched hand in hand in times of oppression and resilience. We will continue to go forward and join hands to shape a just, accepting, and welcoming society for all of humanity. Again, my name is Ari Ackerman. On behalf of the Jewish Federations of North America, I thank you all for joining us today for this incredibly meaningful hour, conversation, and discussion. Thank you all.